November 4th, 2019 will go down in history as one of the most significant days in American motorsports history. Penske Entertainment Group announced its purchase of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Corporation, and Roger Penske now holds the keys to the Indianapolis 500 and IndyCar. This, without hyperbole, is one of the biggest sports acquisitions in history. Not just from a financial perspective, but from a significant historical perspective. And obviously, this cannot be understated what a major deal this is. Roger Penske, of course, almost needs no introduction. His history speaks for itself. He is not only one of the most successful businessmen in the country, but by far in terms of the history of auto racing. And we're talking about guys like Enzo Ferrari and Ron Dennis. You mention all these people, and quite honestly, Roger Penske is probably the most successful of all of them. He has wins in every category imaginable. He's participated in almost every category imaginable. Then you think about his business connections. Virtually every auto manufacturer in the world, at one point or another, Penske has had a relationship with. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway is now on its fourth owner. And the first time that this speedway has been sold since just post-World War II, when there was a conglomerate that was put together by Wilbur Shaw, who was a three-time Indianapolis 500 winner, which included at its head Tony Holman, the grandfather of all we kind of know in Indianapolis car racing, leading all the way up to the present. Obviously, the Holman-George family, as it's known now, has been the figureheads of the sport and have really kind of pointed it in the direction that it has been going for 50, 60, 70 years now. It's an unbelievable... This is such an unbelievably significant event. It's going to be difficult to talk about all of the aspects of this in just one video, so I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to try to talk about broad generalizations or just the general facts and some of the ideas that seem to be coming about based on Penske's acquisition of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So the news conference is the first thing I kind of want to touch on. Because to me, my opinion, and I think the opinion of a lot of other people, there is nobody else in the entire world who is more suited to this position, who has done more to get to this position than Roger Penske. I'm well aware that there are some details that will come up eventually, like whether or not he wants to keep bump day. But as a whole, this is the perfect guy. One of the things that the Holman and Company, in my opinion, has really lacked recently has been someone who, at the very top level, really, truly cares not only about the Indianapolis 500, but cares about the series and cares about racing outside of the 465 bubble. I think in recent years, it's been so heavily focused on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and for good reason, because it has obviously made them a lot of money and it has raised the profile of that event significantly. But I think the series itself has suffered a little bit under that kind of a business plan. Roger Penske is going to do things a lot differently than that, I believe. The reason I believe that is pretty simple. It's because Roger Penske, kind of going back to my first point, is he's the perfect man to do this, to take this on. Is not only has Roger Penske owned successful racing tracks before he's built them, they still exist, they still operate even though he no longer owns them, but he's run a series before. And not only a series, he's run an IndyCar Series. And say what you will about CART, this is the second coming of CART. Yes, CART fell apart at the end of its reign, no doubt about it. Roger Penske even said at the press conference, The biggest mistake they made was splitting away from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But IndyCar racing as a whole, not just the Indy 500, but the whole series, was never more profitable, never more successful, never had more manufacturers, fans, TV ratings than when it was under Roger Penske's control. The one mistake that Roger made was not having the Indianapolis 500 in his series. Roger Penske now owns the Indy 500. He owns IndyCar. He's done it once before where he took an IndyCar series that in 1978-79 was similar to where we see it now. A product that had a lot of potential, but wasn't being managed quite the way it needed to be. Penske formed CART with the car owners, looked out for not only the car owners' interests, but also looked out for the track promoters' interests outside of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and grew the whole thing up, and that rising tide raised everything. Now, I do want to also say, because Tony George was at this press conference, obviously, and was instrumental in getting this deal done. Walked up to Roger Penske in his own words and asked him about presiding over the future of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And say what you will about Tony George, and I know a lot of people have and probably will say things, but it was pretty clear, and it's pretty clear that Tony George cares about this speedway and about the series. And, like I said, in the last 10 years, Tony George hasn't been in charge of things. And he was for a while. And credit to Tony George. He had the ability to take kind of IndyCar racing by the reins and point it in a direction and say, we're going to go in this direction. This is what we're doing. And it's either going to work or it's not. Now, the problem, I think, with Tony George, this is my opinion, and I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but I don't think Tony George is quite as good a businessman as Roger Penske is, to be completely honest. I think Roger Penske, now that he is totally in charge, will be able to do the same thing that Tony George did in 1996. Take the reins, point it in a direction that he thinks is going to work, but unlike Tony George or even some of the people who ran CART, who ran USAC, who ran AAA before, he's going to have the business sense, the experience to make whatever direction he pulls IndyCar racing, the Indianapolis 500, and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He's going to be able to make that work, and not only work, but raise those tides. That whole thing, hopefully, I think will raise up under Roger Penske's rule. And another thing that has kind of befell IndyCar recently, especially, but really pretty much since the split happened, because the Holman family, again, and this is not necessarily a criticism, but they've been so focused on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway itself, I think they've allowed a lot of stagnation in their approach to not only the 500, but also the series especially. And if the news conference with Roger Penske is any indication, this guy is not going to sit on his hands and continue business as usual. I think there are going to be a lot of things that end up changing. In fact, one of the things that I think really made me most confident about Roger Penske taking this over is that he gave this testimonial about when he was 14 and his dad took him to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and he talked about how excited he was to sit in a roadster and see Lee Wallard win the Indianapolis 500. And in the news conference, when he was asked specifically about things that he was thinking about doing with the series or with the Speedway, things like he mentioned a 24-hour race. Is it possible to do that? Is it possible to bring F1 back? Holy smokes, that's fantastic, first of all, as a fan, but I think that's exactly why it spoke to me as a fan, because Roger Penske in that moment was not the 80-year-old businessman sitting in front of that podium. He's that 14-year-old kid who's excited. He's got the greatest toy in the world, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and he's literally got free reign to pretty much do whatever he wants with this racetrack, racing-wise or entertainment-wise. Now, this is the thing that worries me a little bit, and I'm sure will worry some other people, but also at the same time makes me kind of think that this is where the business plan is going to go. I think there was a specific quote from Penske in this news conference that he talked about not only making this track, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the racing capital of the world, but the entertainment capital of the world. So that implies to me that there is going to be a lot more happening at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway than just racing. Now, that's not to say that racing is not going to have a huge commitment from Roger Penske. I think it's pretty clear that Roger Penske wants to expand on the events that are already there and add new ones. But I also think I would bet you a lot of money right now that within 5 years, and probably less than that, there will be a casino at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. There'll probably be one, think about that little patch on the back straightaway where there used to be a grandstand on the entrance to Turn 3. I bet you there'll be a 3-story casino there where you can do sports betting, where you can bet on the Indianapolis 500, where you can go and bet on the Kentucky Derby, pull slot machines 24/7, 365 year-round. I think there will be stuff like that, and that's definitely going to rub some people the wrong way. But here's what I think stuff like that could and would do if that's the direction that Penske Entertainment Group is going to go with this, is that revenue like that, revenue from a casino or from having a bunch of concerts or bringing a PGA Tour, a golf tournament to the track, whatever, that kind of stuff will allow the financial freedom to say, hey, we can host a WEC 24-hour race here or an IMSA 24-hour race here, and we can afford to lose some money on this because we're making so much money elsewhere at the casino or on the golf course or whatever. I'm sure a lot of people are worried about coolers and whatnot. I mean, that is minutia, but again, there's going to be a lot to break down here. So as well, a lot of people were talking about Penske maybe having a conflict of interest. I'd like to, again, newsflash, he not only ran a series before, an IndyCar series, but Tony George is a board member on the IndyCar series, or was before this acquisition, and he runs Ed Carpenter Racing, or at least is a part owner in that. So this has always happened. These are private companies. That's why we don't have a sales figure. That's not much of a concern. People talking about the fastest 33, Penske specifically. Here's the thing. The fastest 33 25 and 8 rule deal, the reason Penske was advocating for it was because it directly benefited Penske to have locked in entries. Penske is now the Indianapolis 500. It doesn't benefit him nearly as much now that he owns the track and the series to make there be less days that are profitable or less spectator interesting, or less days that are interesting to a spectator during the month of May. So I would honestly believe, from a business perspective now, considering the position Roger Penske is in, 25 and 8 will not be there because bump day needs to be a day that can be profitable. Talking about stagnation, one of the things that really encouraged me about what Roger Penske was talking about, one of the couple of key points that he really nailed was social media. Talking a lot about social media. One of the things that I think IndyCar does not do very well, and I'm not necessarily saying this about the people who run it right now. I think a lot of it has to come down to budgets or not having the creative freedom to do what they want to do, is that the social media is lacking. You look at the F1 YouTube channel, and I know I'm a YouTuber. I'm going to look at this a little more critically than somebody else. You look at the F1 YouTube channel, tons of views, tons of content, tons of stuff that gets young people involved. You look at the IndyCar channel, and they post a classic race every week, and that's it. You look at what Penske does with his social media, the Penske Games. Do I need to say any more? A huge social media project that gets the drivers out there, is a viral potential content thing. I would expect that you'll see more stuff like that coming down the line. I think Penske is going to hopefully see what we see, and that is that the social media is not up to even where NASCAR is, much less where Formula One is in terms of engagement. This is the other thing, a couple of things. Penske, again, going back to that stagnation thing, he specifically said he's prepared to take risks, and not just with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but with the series itself. That says to me, hey, potential doubleheader. Hey, if you need to get a manufacturer in there, why not open up the rules a little bit? Why not allow 4 cylinders? Why not allow electric cars? If somebody's willing to build one to go to the Indianapolis 500 and compete, why not? I think there's so many potential things now. And again, what makes me so confident about this, or at least more confident than I have been. Again, Penske is a guy who eats, sleeps, and breathes the Indianapolis 500, IndyCar racing, and auto racing in general. He has a global perspective, not only on racing, but on business. He knows how to make all this stuff work. He probably lays in bed, and probably has been for the last, since he was 14, probably laid in bed and dreamed of what he would do if he ran the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the Indianapolis 500, and IndyCar racing. If he controlled all of it, what would he do? This guy's been thinking about this for this long. And I, for one, am excited to see what he does. Obviously, this is not the end of this coverage from me. This is one of the most significant, honestly, I've said it before, I'll say it again. This is one of the most significant, not only racing stories, not only racing acquisitions of all time. This is one of the most significant sports acquisitions, sports stories of our lifetimes that's happened right now. I mean, this is equivalent to the New York Yankees going out and buying Major League Baseball, or Ferrari going out and buying Formula One. I know a lot of people will talk about Liberty Media. I mean, that's a conglomerate. This is one man's vision, one man's dream. He could be America's Bernie Ecclestone. And like I said, Penske, he's got the racing knowledge, he's got the business sense to take the reins, pull it in one direction for the first time probably ever, or at least since Tony Holman took it over and had this position of power where he can point it in a direction, and hopefully that direction will lead to IndyCar racing back on top in the United States. So many exciting things. Let me know down in the comments section below. I'm sure this will not be the last video on this, and we'll continue to talk about it as it develops. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. It's a brave new era, and I, for one, welcome our Penske overlords.